So that being said, let's go back to the concept that we were discussing about. So this is how you go ahead and represent a tabular form of data, right? Usually when you look at data sets, one thing you have to understand is most of the time when you open it, okay, it will be in a rows and a columns and rows format, right? So vertical references are your columns, your horizontal references are your rows, okay? Depending on what tool you are using or what concept you are using, there may be different terms to it, but it ideally means the same thing, okay? When we use it in Excel, it's called column and rows. When you do any kind of statistical examples, it's usually variables and your variables and incidents, okay? When you talk about machine learning concept, it is examples will be each row and features will be each of your columns, okay? Just different terminology to signify the same thing. So anything that is on the column verticals will be your features or your variables. Okay, anything that is there on the row is your incident or your incident or your example. Okay, so when you talk about an entire row of data, that is one incident of that data, and when you talk about different columns, that is different features or different description of that data set. Okay, so that could be in terms of your, say for example, text like a city, state, right? It could be a binomial feature, whether text or numeric, like a gender, male, female, right? It could be other features like different descriptions of the student, for example, student status, graduate, undergraduate, right? It could also be like different segmentation that is done or classification that is done, like which kind of a major he is doing, maths, economics, right? It could be numeric data like your age or your SAT ratios or average score that is there or height that is there, newspaper reading in terms of week, right? So they can be any form of data that is stored. Ideally, there will be a unique identifier also there, like we have first name and last name here, right? There will be one unique identifier or an ID that we have here is the unique identifier. So unique identifier basically helps you to identify that particular incident in the entire data set. So whenever I'm searching for information, if I put in the unique identifier or the primary key, it's also sometimes referred to as primary key. When I put in that primary key, I will know whether I'm talking about the incident that is there in row number 10 or the incident that I'm talking about in the row number 23. Right? If I refer to the variables only, then that will go ahead and signify any kind of a feature of all the available data sets that I have. Okay, that's how you uh, read a tabular data. However, when you look at the data that is stored in generic, it may not always be in tabular form. For example, it can be in unstructured form or a semi-unstructured form like a CSV data. Okay, CSV is basically comma separated files. Okay, that means the data is stored in terms of a text file and each of the variables will be separated with a comma. However, when you finally import it into any of the tools like a SAS or R or even Excel, it will convert to a tabular representation of data. Okay. Then when we look at this, what are the different things that we do when we go ahead and get data is we want to know, as soon as you have this data set right here, right? First thing I would want, there are certain things that I would want to know, right? Those would be, for example, what are the different variables that I have? Okay, that's the first thing I need to see, because nowadays the information is so vast. You have so much of information everywhere that it becomes pretty difficult, to go ahead and analyze everything. Instead of that, the first thing that you need to see is what are the variables that's included in this, right? What kind of an information is there? What is the information that I'm going to get out of these variables that I have? Because then what you can do is, if there is anything that is unnecessary or something that is not contributing to what I require, I can drop those variables and reduce the size of data. Okay. The reason I'm giving you this example is because nowadays, whenever you analyze data, it's hardly about 5 or 10 variables, or not even about 100 variables. If you do examine data that is there that you receive nowadays, there'll be thousands of variables that is there, and all of them are not always contributing. right? Some of there are just just a subset of a data that is already existed in a consolidated form. Okay, so you should always keep in mind, for example, many sales field that you will see that you will have one data that says say 12 o'clock sale, 1 o'clock sale, 2 o'clock sale, and then you have 3 o'clock sale, and then you have the day sale, okay, the entire sale for the day. So these data, if I look at it, it's in a way redundant, right? If I'm doing an analysis of a daily sales report, I don't need these variables. I only need the overall consolidated variable. Okay. If this does not exist right now, okay, if I understand what are variables included, I know that I can simply add this up, and when I add this up, it will give me the resultant. Yeah, those are things that you have to keep in mind when you are analyzing your data, right? Next thing that is there is, what is the format of the variable I'm looking at? So is it a string? String basically means text. Okay, is it numeric? That is it numbers 1, 2, 3, 4, and so on and so forth, right? Or is it a boolean? For example, 0 and 1. We use this a lot, right, to do a lot of filtering, to look at yes or no situations, to make certain kind of differentiation in data, putting in any kind of if you want to remove something, you can put in a boolean variable and then go ahead and do the filtering, right? So there is a lot of other formats also we'll be talking about in detail. Okay, and after you know what's the format of the variable, we'll also want to know what kind of variables that is there. Okay, is it a categorical variable? Is it a continuous variable? Is it a discrete variable? We'll look at these three concepts a little in some time. Okay, that's another thing that you'll have to see. Now, another thing that is very important to understand is this going to be, let me just remove these for now. So I'll have to see whether it is a sample data or a population data. Okay, that basically means, does it include everybody who is going to be affected by the decision I'm going to make, or is it just a subset that I've taken out from that entire population as a representative of this whole on which I am going to apply the decision I'm going to make or the strategy I'm going to decide, right? So if it is the whole data I'm looking at and everybody that's going to be affected with it, then that is a population data. Okay. If I have taken out a smaller part and that's what I'm analyzing, then that is a sample data. Okay. So whether it's a population data or a sample data is also something that you have to keep in mind. After I look at all of these general aspects, right, I have a certain bit of understanding what the data is. Then the next thing I need to look at is what are different segregates that is there, or what are more minute details about this particular data set. How many males or females are there? If gender is part of my analysis, right? If my age demographics is more important, I look at what is my average age, or what are different distribution of different age that I have. If education is going to make impact into my analysis, then I'll have to see how many graduates and how many undergraduate students I have. Right? What is the overall SAT scores, or what is the overall scores for that particular people? Okay? Who reads the newspaper more frequently, men or women? So I go into a more granular level of analysis. Okay? This is how you start doing different exploration in terms of data or data handling.